This series is brought to you by my beloved patrons and YouTube members. G'day friends, welcome back to my Cities Skylines model train set. What do you think it is that makes you a train enthusiast? And I bring it up because the more I dive into this series, the more I realize how little I know about trains. And that is kind of funny because I do classify myself as an enthusiast, and we are only 5 episodes in, but I already feel like I've learned quite a lot about different types of engines and operations and how they operate. It's all very interesting, but I tell you what, it's not the thing that's driving my inspiration for this series. So I'll start. The reason why I like trains is, of course, the train journey, which is probably relatable to most people. I mean, who doesn't like a good train trip? Because there is just something really fascinating, something a little bit magical about the way it has to navigate a landscape, the way it interacts with the urban environment, the natural environment, the way it influences these places, especially a city or a town. And you know what? Chucking an engine that's spinning smoke and fire and steam all over the place, oh man, that is magical. So that is why I like trains. It's the journey. I feel like most people can relate. And I bring it up because that is, of course, going to be the focus for today. We are going to be finally focusing on some trains, the network, but I feel like the journey part is probably more of a metaphor for this episode because it is a bit of a journey. Our starting point is far different to our ending, and you'll probably realize why I do spend so much time on the destination of this train trip, more than anything else. It's pretty complicated, I don't fully understand it, and I will need your help. But first, let's start where I thought the episode was going to start. I thought that this episode was going to be a Sully episode. An episode where we were going to expand out our city, our town, our bunch of just random little grids and squiggly roads. I was kind of keen to get into this area and really just figure out what on earth the city was going to look like and evolve into. At the moment, we need a bit of residential, so I was keen to expand out some of the suburbs that had a pretty clear idea of whereabouts they're going to be going, and I was using some more of these not validated ocean houses, which are truly amazing. However, it is really easy just to fall into the trap of suburbia all looks the same, but I feel like when you just get a little bit closer, realize different patterns, realize different rooftops and architecture, and start thinking about when these places were built and how they were expanded, it gets a little bit more interesting. And I would like to show that. So I do need to mix up a bit of the architecture. We do have some pretty great assets on the Steam Workshop that I've got so many of these houses at this moment, and I was very close just to placing this down and detailing them up just on the spot. However, I do feel like I do need to go into Asset Editor and, just like I did with Sunset City, make some custom houses, make some custom lots, and just detail this up so that I can just place them down and make this whole area feel and look way more realistic. Now, I know it doesn't sound like much, but it did definitely throw me because I like to go into these builds with a pretty clear idea in my mind of what I was going to be doing, and now I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, a problem did arise, which did give me a nice little focus for today's episode. We ran out of electricity. Now, this is a bit of a supply chain issue where no coal is being burned at our coal power station because we have no coal on the map. Nothing is being mined and nothing is being transported, which in my books is a nice little problem to fix. And in fact, this is very much in line with the vision of Sully, as this is inspired by Newcastle in New South Wales. This is a city very much focused on coal exporting, and a huge amount of industry around it definitely reflects it, with a lot of the mines taking place within the Hunter region, not too far away from this area, but just a really nice connection of rail line, and just these big steam trains hauling all this coal is just a really cool sight. So this is something that is a big focus for this series, and it's really exciting to already have a reason why we need this to take place. In terms of resources, we've actually got a lot of coal on the map, and that's not really going to be much of a problem. We've pretty much got anywhere to pick. So before I did any building, I wanted to get a good idea of where certain aspects of this network were going to be. You know, there's like certain things in my mind that I want to capture, and I thought that it would be a good idea just to draw it up on Procreate, which is an app that I use to draw on my iPad. And this way I could figure out where those aspects were going to be. For instance, I did want there to be a nice little bridge that was going to stretch across this river, and I wanted it to be inspired by this section around Newcastle, which it's going to be taking loose inspiration because there is no train line that is going over this little section. Well, there is, but it's not this part. But I do always love this little area, and I will be diving into this at another date. But for now, I did want to just figure out whereabouts that was going to be. And this is all part of the main line, so there are going to be connections towards Sully, the central station, and also where the docks will be. But the main bulk of it, and where we're going to be focusing mostly in today's episode, is going to be around this section of the river where we're going to be having a pretty big port, a rail yard, and that is going to be taking up the bulk of the episode, which I think you'll realize when I get into it, the reasons why it does take so long. But I do want to just figure out where some of these train lines are going to be snaking through, and it's all a bit of planning just for now, which is why it's so great to use something like Procreate. And with all that down, it was time to jump back into the game, and I figured maybe the end of the line would be the best place to start. You know, where it all gets exported to, the rail yard. Well, this is where the bulk of my time goes. Because, like I mentioned before, I've got an appreciation for trains, but to have an understanding of an area like this is a totally different level. I am starting to get a good sense of it, and I've had a lot of help from a couple of people who have just been walking me through some of the steps to create something that is of a bit of realism and time and era appropriate, but I still feel like we need a little bit of work down here. So if you've got any ideas, please let me know. And of course, there is like a level of realism within this series. You know, it is not to scale. There's going to be a lot of aspects that I just can't fit into these areas. But, you know, in terms of like not breaking your brain, if you actually understand how these things work, it's going to work to some level, or it's going to represent how it works to some level. And what this area is essentially is where all the coal is brought from those coal mines via these trains. It gets all managed and distributed, depending on whereabouts it's going. It goes into lots of different locations, and it's pretty much just managed within this area, but a lot of it is then put onto these boats and then exported elsewhere. The source of inspiration for this is Port Waratah. You can see where I'm taking my inspiration from. It is pretty similar in terms of rail line. I didn't want to steer too clear away from it just because, you know, being the first time building something so complicated like this, I did want to do something that was going to be pretty accurate. But unfortunately, that is accurate for 2022. But of course, we needed something a little older, you know, 1960s era. And unfortunately, it's changed quite a bit. And this is the part where I find really interesting. This is how it looks back in the 1950s, which is, I think, pretty interesting. You can see generally the same layout. If anything, it is actually pretty much exactly the same, except for a couple of little bits and pieces. First of all, this section over here, I'm not entirely sure what this is because we don't build anything close to this in this episode, but from what I can tell, it's some sort of steelworks. But another place that has changed quite a lot is this storage part that is now here. This is now just coal storage. These are big piles with some pretty big machinery just managing it all. But back in the day, this was a rail yard and essentially operating the same way, except it was just hoppers of coal just sitting here. And that does make it a little bit more complicated because there's not a huge amount of reference photos. I do have a couple of like maps that give you a good idea of the general layout, and I'm following that pretty well, but in terms of photos, I don't have a huge amount, which does make it tricky because it's, you know, when it gets to the detail work, it does make it a bit more complicated how to actually make all that work. But I'm really lucky to have, you know, this map that does give me a good idea of the ins and outs of it all. And That's essentially what I'm working on right now, is just trying to figure out how to kind of like condense what is a lot of train line within a much smaller space. Story of my life, and it is going to be the story of my life for the entirety of this series, because train lines are pretty long and pretty wide and can be really complicated, but I will be essentially doing a dumbed down version of it all, just so we can squeeze it into a much smaller space, and you'll see a pretty good idea of how it all looks with everything else in Sully in a little while. And I tell you what, it's a pretty good fit. So like I mentioned, it all pretty much operates within a loop. You have the one-way in, and that all pretty much leads towards the docks, and then you can do a bit of a loop. There are 2 ways of looping back around, so I guess I'm not really sure what the purpose behind that is. Maybe I feel like if you miss your turn off, then you have to do a loop, but I guess it's probably more like if you are storing in a particular spot, then you might switch around like that and totally bypass the docks. Now, something I just want to quickly add is that I am currently working with one of my all-time favorite asset creators, who is going to be creating some custom train assets for this particular network. Because this is going to be such a main focus point for this series, I do need a custom train for it. And in fact, I would like some custom trains, or just slightly more customized, like some custom liveries or something like that, even just modifying the carriages behind or wagons behind, whatever it is. I do want to get this thing looking and feeling quite unique depending on what rail line we're talking about. So that is to come. So for now, you're just going to see some more generic looking trains on this network, and in the near future, we should see a little bit more uniqueness coming to all this. So just keep that in mind. But that is pretty much it in terms of layout. I was pretty happy with it, and I felt like the Railyard itself worked out pretty well as well. And then it was time to start working on what I found on the historical imagery site, which I have to say, you have to go and check it out and just have a little explore. It's a lot of fun seeing the before and after of a lot of Australian places. But I did notice there is a roundhouse down here, which is pretty exciting because, well, I mean, it's a bit sad because it doesn't exist anymore, but I was excited to see this because it gave me a good excuse to use this amazing asset that I do have. And I'm just going to be placing it down today just to get an idea of whereabouts it's going to sit. But I'm pretty happy with this location. I think it makes a lot of sense. It is still pretty similar to what it's like at Port Waratah, at least what it used to be like. And I think it would be really fun to detail this up at a later stage. But with the roundhouse down, it was time to just tighten up some of the network and add in a couple of extra lines. We did have a little bit of extra space, but I was also just trying to use Move It just to move some of the networks and some of the nodes so that we did have enough space just to fit in as much as possible without overcrowding it, of course. But I do really love these turning areas where you can pretty much do the full loop. You can see them on either end. I do end up removing the one that sits closest to the dock. I just feel like it was a bit of a tight squeeze. You can see me working on it right now, but I do end up removing it just because I feel like it's just maybe a little bit too much. But now I do kind of miss it now that I've rewatched this footage. So if you think I should get it back, let me know. But otherwise, I do have this other one on the other end. You know, I wanted to give it a pretty big radius, but then I also don't have a huge amount of space. So just playing around with a bit of that and figuring out how it's going to, you know, because I didn't want to have an intersection. I had to make sure that it actually went either over the top or underneath, and I did choose to make it so that it does go over the top, and I just feel like this looks pretty nice. But by the time I finished up the Railyard, I realized that I'd given myself another problem. I did have a fairly main road that was stretching across the bridge and coming into this area, and in my mind, it didn't really need to just finish here. It was the sort of road that was going to be going through the city and then connecting up to another part. Very much a stroad, and I didn't want the end of the line to be at the port. So I had to figure out a way of making it feel like it was naturally going through, and by natural I mean realistically going through an area like this. And I figured that it would have been a would have been an upgrade of some of the pre-existing roads that are around here in a similar manner to how a lot of the roads and highway has been stretched through Newcastle. I wanted to take inspiration from that and just make it look like it has just been a continuation of some of the roads that have already been here, and maybe with the addition of a couple of other ones that have just gone through a bit of wetland or taken up some old industry. And I guess somewhere along this line I did get a little bit distracted and I guess slightly inspired, because when I was figuring out where this road was going, I was thinking about how does this impact the people that live here, and what do those houses look like. I mean, all of this is inspired by Carrington in Newcastle, and this part is kind of interesting because it's one of those neighborhoods that would have been established, was established for the industry that was within the area. And that's why a lot of the houses look the same. That's why they are quite small. It's because this was housing for the workers that was part of the industry. And it's little things like this that make cities so fascinating to me, because once you start noticing little quirks or learning about a little bit of history, you can't unsee it. And I've always loved Carrington. I just feel like it's got a real charm to it. But back in the day, this probably wouldn't have been a very nice place. So I kind of wanted to create something very much inspired by this area. And the houses that I chose are pretty much on point. Not just that, but the roads themselves. Carrington does have a lot of these wide avenues. I think it's probably because there was a bit more truck traffic coming through here, but I could be wrong behind that. But I do really like these wide avenues that I did end up choosing, and I ended up putting quite a bit of detail into these, like changing some of the nodes and putting some extra decals and just changing them up. And they are subtle changes, but I think they make a really big difference. And I am putting in quite a bit of detail down here in certain areas, but I do plan to come back down and spend like a whole episode just working on some of the detail, because like I said, I do want this neighborhood to feel super unique and really interesting, and it's definitely going to be a bit of a focal point, especially with all those trains just rolling through and just going to those ports and the harbors up on the water's edge. That's going to be really nice. But I reckon we'll have to probably move where that harbor sits, where people are coming in. It probably doesn't really belong here anymore. And with that, it was time to get back to the train line. I was definitely avoiding it at this point because I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed. But I reckon I'd done the hardest part. It was time to start dragging out the network and get a bit of a sense of how it's going to look on the map. Not just as a drawing, but actually seeing how it looked and fit. I had my sights set on the bridge because, like I said, there is a source of inspiration for this. It's this bridge down here. The name of it has escaped me, but for some reason, I always find this area really interesting when driving through Newcastle or driving past Newcastle. I don't know why, I just feel like there's a lot down here, and I'm going to dive into this at a later stage because there's a whole rabbit hole to be had. But this bridge, of course, is not a train bridge, but I felt like it would be really nicely suited for it too. There's something just about those lift bridges I find just so fascinating, and I'm always thrilled when I find one on Google Earth. And for this one, I feel like it's gonna really frame the rest of the city, just having this in its sight lines, and I just think it's going to be something that is gonna be kind of nice just to have in the backdrop behind the city, or even just the views from this area towards the city. It's just something that I think will be a nice little sight. So I decided to put a bit of detail into it all, but I reckon this is going to really come to life when we put a little bit more time and effort into all the mangroves down below and just flesh out this whole area. But with that done, I felt like that was a good finishing point to dive into a live play. So let's dive into a live play, and I'll give you a bit of a tour of some of the things that we've been building and see if any of it's going to fix our supply chain issue. So I've just been spending a bit of time just looking at our newly established train line, and this took such a long time just to create and get my head around, but I'm even like just looking at it, finding flaws and thinking about how I still need to change certain aspects of it just so it makes a little bit more sense. But We'll explore that in just a moment. I do want to give a bit of a tour on the things that I have been building, and we will connect it up to see whether or not it is actually going to be transporting goods to our factories that truly need it. And in terms of goods, we are going to be transporting coal. I did end up naming up a couple of places. We now have Port Capen, which is a name pending. I'm still waiting to hear back and seeing if he wants it to be called that in the first place. We've also got Maynard is going to be the suburb that's going to be sitting around here, all surrounded by industry. But honestly, I reckon that's going to be one of the more fun neighborhoods within Sullivan. And then we of course have the McFarlane Valley. So this is where all of our coal is going to be. And I'm feeling a little bit motivated right now, and I think I'm going to, I reckon I will detail up our Railyard just to get a good feel of how it's going to look in the future, but it'll be not to its truest potential. I reckon there's still a lot that I will need to do down here. This is pretty much as big as I can get. And also just keeping in mind that we are going to be having quite a lot of rail line out this way as it feeds into more of the port. And of course, we will have to remove our harbour and place him somewhere else. But I reckon he might even be better off at a little spot like this. But something else that I do want to just change at a later stage, probably in the next episodes, but this road just feels a little bit awkward. I reckon we could do a bit more of a windy thing, and I reckon it's going to be a bit more influenced by this river, which I'll probably snake around at a different spot. But for now, it is just fine. It is definitely not part of the priorities at the moment. But I reckon this is looking pretty good. It's going to be interesting when we start seeing a train actually make its journey across. And I am still trying to figure out what on earth all of this part is going to look like, because I'm sort of thinking that this will probably just be dedicated to some sort of industry. I reckon even some sort of steelworks might sit out here. In fact, that's probably exactly what's going to be there. Just an entrance to the steelworks, and we'll probably just leave it at that. So I reckon this will just stay there for now, and we'll have to like rejig how this road interacts with all of it. I reckon this will probably go more towards down here and connect up to whatever main road we have. This one. That'll be a good connection just there. Now, all of this is obviously still a bit janky, as the further out you go, the worse it gets, and that is so fine, because we do need to make some adjustments when we actually get out this way, except for this bridge, which I feel like has turned out pretty nice. I have also gone through and just used procedural objects just to change the height of some of these two I don't know, pillars, sides of the bridge. I don't really know what to call them. But I reckon that is a pretty good size. I reckon that works really well. And I'm a big fan. I reckon the highway will probably stretch out this way, and we'll have some sort of connection and connect out. Actually, hold on. I just realized we don't have a road connection to McFarlane Valley. I reckon we'll make that the starting point. Let's establish McFarlane Valley, and we will just build the most simplest of industry out here. It is going to be so bare bones. I reckon that is the extent of what I'm going to be doing over here. That's all I really need. It's just going to be serving the purpose of getting coal to our city, and I reckon that is just fine. Of course, we do need to continue dragging out this road. I have opted just to go for a dirt road. Once again, I don't think I will see that many trucks actually driving out this way, and I also don't really want to see that many trucks driving out this way. And then I'm just going to build the other station connected to this part, and it is like with the other station and the ore mine, this is going to be extremely temporary. In fact, it's probably going to change in the next episode. Oh, and that is pretty perfect. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, in terms of connecting it up, that's pretty much all we really needed to do. Now it's just a matter of waiting and seeing if we are, oops, be careful guys, if we're actually going to be producing enough coal, and if it's going to be making the journey across and down into our port, which I think would be really nice if it does. While we wait, we can go ahead and change a couple little things. I can go into vehicle selector, and rather than seeing any vehicle, I can actually change it so that we do have some coal trains. Now, we've got one here, although it's not a steam train, which is a bit of a bummer. I'll just add him there. I'll see if we've got anything else that we could potentially use. Not enough buyers for the product, which means that I do need to zone out more commercial, which is kind of funny because we don't have any demand for commercial. So, come on, guys. And we finally got some people turning up to work, which is great. Now, I think that this is going to be a bit of a waiting game to see whether or not we're going to even get the freight coming into our cargo terminal and making the journey all the way into Sully. I think the plan is to detail up this Railyard, and I'll put a bit of work into it, but I also reckon that I'm going to leave a little bit of room so that we can expand and get a good sense of where the rest of the development is going to happen. So I'm just going to detail it up and do a bit of groundwork, and I reckon by the time we finish doing that, we should hopefully have some trains using it. Geez, it is taking some time, but we are definitely starting to make some good progress down here, but it's definitely going to be a work in progress for some time, especially as I get some ideas from you guys. So please, if there are just little bits of detail I can add, let me know, because there's just like little things that I really struggle with, you know, stuff like would coal piles just realistically be around here? You know, do they just plonk them next to the track like that? Because sometimes I see pictures of it, and then other times I feel like it's not realistic. And also, I've got some really great assets. This doesn't belong here, but I just wanted to place it down and get an idea of what I could potentially use it for. For this one too, what an awesome asset. In fact, I've got a whole bunch of these, and yeah, probably doesn't really fit here, but I'm just going to leave it there just for the time being, just to get a good sense of the sort of things that we have. But yeah, let me know if there are little bits of detail that I could be adding, and we'll continue to chip away. There's actually something I can add down here that I think is going to really transform this into something that is going to look far more realistic. But I do just want to show you something, because a couple little things happened. No trains, no trains just yet, but these little icons, they did disappear, and we are now, well, I guess we've got enough buyers for the product, which is wonderful. So hopefully we'll just, the animation just keeps on coming in and out. Okay. Hopefully some trains are going to start to appear, because that is, I don't know if you know this, but that's kind of the point of this whole series. Sorry, I just got a little bit distracted because this guy turned up, and he looks great. So I did place down a little dock down here just to encourage maybe some trains to spawn, so that hopefully maybe we are getting some cargo being transported from here to here. Although maybe, no, it didn't solve that problem. So I think we'll just continue to play the waiting game and wait and see if we do get any trains to start spawning while we wait. I do have something else that we can add down here. That makes an enormous difference. Oh man, that just feels so lovely having all that down there. And it's going to be even nicer when we actually get some movement as well. Not just trains, but also trucks and also just bits and bobs moving around. Hey, a couple of things have happened. So I worked on that, but then I also went pretty much bankrupt. I know it doesn't look like it, but I did just adjust the balance a little bit, the budget, and all of a sudden, this was it. So I don't know where all that money came from, but great. I'm not going to complain about that. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to complain a little bit because I don't know where it came from. It makes no sense, but I guess I'll take it because as much as I'm like detailing stuff, I do also like to have a little bit of a budget just to make it so that this actually functions and works, you know? And with that budget, with all that money now, I decided just to do a little test because we just don't have any trains. And I thought, okay, well, in Cities Skylines 2, you can actually drag out a path for your cargo trains to go along. So you can actually go from point A to point B, but you can't do that in this game. So instead, I have done a very, I mean, it's a bit dodgy. I've done a bit of a dodgy little train line, and I've realized that I cannot drag any sort of train line to this one, which means that there is some sort of disconnect somewhere on my line, which is kind of annoying, but I guess a little bit of a relief because that does mean that that's what the problem is. There actually is just no connection. So I can make a connection there. So I guess that little stretch is fine. If I place another train station down here, I guess if it doesn't connect, that'll mean that the disconnect is somewhere within my train yard. And no. Okay, that's kind of cool. What about from here to here? Great. So that's a relief because that could have been a real pain. Okay. So it's somewhere around here. Haha, gotcha. So I think I've solved that problem. Now we actually have a connection. Yeah, we do. All right, I can get rid of all these ugly little passenger stations because I believe that we now have a nice little connection to our cargo terminals. I'm just so glad that that is fixed now, and we actually have some trains rolling along these lines, which is wonderful. Something that I've just gone through and changed is I was a little bit worried about the length of the smoke that was being produced on these trains, at least it was before. But what I've just done is I've gone through to these lines along this train network, and I've just lowered down the speed to something that is a little bit more appropriate, and that's just made the smoke trail a little less. I still feel like it's probably a bit long, but you know, that is something that we can adjust when we do start getting some custom assets being made for all this. But for now, that is looking really nice. What I will do though is I'm going to go over to our bridge and I'm going to adjust the speed limit to be even slower. Is there a little steam effect down there as well? There is. That's pretty amazing. I can't tell if I just didn't notice that before, or maybe it's just because he's going at a slower speed. But I tell you what, that effect is actually really nice. And I also think that the slower speed is a massive improvement to the trail of the smoke. And that is a Cities Skylines, that is something that is restricted with Cities Skylines. They're not really meant to be doing stuff like this. We are definitely taking it to the next level. And when I say that, I mean asset creators. But that is something I really did not expect, so that is exciting. Now, we've got unlimited speed limit here, and that's not going to cut it. So I'm going to drop him down to an absolute crawl. We'll go 30 kilometers an hour. I'm going to press shift so it does go on that entire network. And I'm just going to put it on these segments as well. At some point, we will have a couple of trains actually making the journey along these little networks, but for now, it is just, it's pretty much just hightailing it the shortest route possible, and that's fine as we continue just to get an idea of how it's all going to look. And look, there it is, that steam effect, that is really, really cool. And unfortunately, he is just going to disappear there. And I guess I'm going to put it to you guys, what do we do in terms of these networks? Because they will continue to disappear when they make the delivery. They don't just turn around. Unfortunately, he'd turn around if it was a dummy train and it was a passenger service that was delivering nothing, had a cargo of nothing, purely there for looks. But if we were to do that, we'd then be able to pick and choose how the train interacts with an area like this. Port Pennington, which we did just name up, named after the Pennington River, which is the main river stretching through all this. Do we just have a whole bunch of dummy trains making false, pretend, purely aesthetic deliveries? And we won't worry too much about the actual real deliveries, which will be being made by the cars, the trucks, which is also fine. So I'll leave it to you guys what you think about all that. But that is pretty much it for this episode. I feel like I got quite a bit done, but in the next episode, I might just keep it all time-lapse and focus on developing up Sully a little bit more, because we do need quite a lot more people down here. We definitely got the demand for it, but my demand is also pretty high for it, to be honest. I would really like to see a little bit more fleshed out down here and get a good idea of how everything is going to start to expand. But I'm also a little bit in the mood for detailing. Got a little bit done today, but I'd actually prefer to get a whole lot more done in the next one. So, got any ideas of how we can detail up Sully and expand him out? Please let me know in the comments below. But anyway guys, thank you all so much for watching today's episode, and a huge shout out to my YouTube members and patrons for making videos like this possible. Aussie69, Pro Prostri Casper, Stills, Ronald Booker, Gox Gaming, Robert Green, Derek Vital, Patrick Callahan, Tim Tam Biscuits, Peter, VOJ, Sherrisville, and Big393. Cheers guys, catch you on the next one.